From the newsroom of Impact Alpha, I'm Monique Aiken, and this is your Impact Briefing for Friday, August 18th. Today I'm joined by Paris Prince of the Intentional Endowments Network to talk about the future of racial equity investing and how impact investors are responding to legal attacks on affirmative action and racial wealth building strategies. Welcome, Paris.
Thank you. So wonderful to be here with you.
But first, here's what you need to know from the week in impact investing. The Inflation Reduction Act turned 1 this week. The bulk of the federal funding has yet to flow, but private investors in clean energy have already invested billions. More than 80 domestic clean energy projects and manufacturing facilities have attracted at least $270 billion in the past year alone. According to the American Clean Power Association, that's more than all such investments from the previous 8 years put together. This week, Singapore-based Maxion Solar said it would invest $1 billion into a 3-gigawatt solar factory in Albuquerque, New Mexico. 2- and 3-wheeled vehicles are driving the shift to electric vehicles. Investors are pumping capital into India's e-mobility transition, helping startups in the sector raise more than $1.6 billion last year, more than double the total in 2021. Impact Alpha contributor Shafali Anand found a university student in Delhi who makes $400 a month driving an e-rickshaw and pays only $40 for charging. And D-Light is helping take pay-as-you-go solar in Africa to the next level with a new debt facility to securitize its loans to customers. Securitized financing lets D-Light move outstanding customer loans off its balance sheet, freeing up capital to finance new customers. Accessing such capital is one of the advantages held by leaders in the off-grid market. As Jessica Pothering reports, smaller companies have found it harder to get such low-cost financing, leading to the industry's consolidation around a few major players. The other shoe has dropped. After this summer's Supreme Court ruling barring race-based affirmative action in college admissions, impact investors were concerned about the future of strategies to drive funding to Black and brown entrepreneurs and increase diversity in asset management. This month, the same conservative activist who spearheaded the legal strategy against affirmative action filed a new lawsuit against Atlanta-based Fearless Fund, alleging anti-white bias in a small grant program supporting Black women entrepreneurs. It's thought to be the first salvo in a much broader attack on race-specific remedies to race-specific harms. Here to help us unpack the issues and the implications is Paris Prince, Director of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the Intentional Endowments Network. So Paris, can you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from members of the Intentional Endowments Network about the case?
I can say, based on our ongoing discussions within the Intentional Endowments Network, we've been focused on clarity because it's important to note what the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action means and doesn't mean. The decision was a narrow one. It did not directly address universities as investors. Yet the ruling has been interpreted by some as having implications that are much broader in the higher education landscape and the ways in which universities approach DEI overall. But as the universities are navigating these legal and social dynamics that are changing so rapidly, it's clear from Intentional Endowments Network member institutions that, they must continue to prioritize their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion and explore innovative strategies to promote these values in their investment practices. And I just want to spend a moment to first address, just the anticipation and anxiety about what this ruling means and how it's contributed to widespread uncertainty across higher ed and about the future of campus DEI efforts. And that uncertainty has emboldened pushback that we see in state bills seeking to limit DEI initiatives and the teaching of race-related topics and how that's proliferated. One important note is that this week, the Biden administration published their guidance on the Supreme Court's ruling, and it offers a lot of clarity about this post-affirmative action landscape. It's crucial, particularly in this environment where so many unofficial sources have sought to provide and promote sweeping interpretations of the ruling. So, from the Department of Education and Department of Justice, it's made clear those interpretations are just not true, at least in the executive branch's interpretation. It only addresses admissions programs, not hiring, and definitely not endowment decision making. So it's an important resource for institutions to really understand what that decision did and didn't do. So take a look at that guidance as it reminds schools that, the goals of diversity and inclusion is still legal, and other factors can be used to achieve it. We share many of these best practices and information across the higher education landscape at the Intentional Endowments Network. We are the leading mission aligned investing network for higher education and other endowed institutions. I work there as director of JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And our commitment and our vision is that all endowed institutions will mobilize capital to create a world where all people thrive with equal access to personal and economic opportunity.
Is there anything that universities particularly should be thinking about with respect to their investing that you'd like to share right now?
Yeah, well, ultimately, the decision underscores the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education, and there are many opportunities to address racial equity in the endowment. And as universities consider their investment strategies, they must also consider just how their actions may impact the broader community and the values of DEI. This may involve incorporating ESG factors in their investment decisions, engaging with stakeholders to better understand their perspectives, and also importantly, promoting transparency and accountability in their investment practices. Universities may choose to invest in companies that prioritize DEI in their hiring and promotion practices, as well as those that have a positive impact on underrepresented communities. And additionally, universities may also consider investing in funds that focus on diverse managers and companies, such as those led by women and people of color. Uh, I believe this approach not only aligns with universities' stated DEI values, but also has the potential to generate strong financial returns, as research demonstrates over and over again.
So you personally spent some time in higher ed and you served in a couple different roles and you've been advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion work your entire career. So can you tell us, if you just zoom out a little bit further and say what you think it means for really the higher ed landscape?
Yes, there's no doubt about it. The decision will substantially affect the racial makeup of student bodies at institutions, especially selective ones across the United States. The next round of admissions, you'll see substantial drops in underrepresented, minoritized representation, which will have reverberating implications. Um, and so, what we won't see, hopefully, is that the decision doesn't have implications for universities that have made commitments to DEI in their endowment strategies, because it's not the first time that there's been challenges to those efforts of inclusion. And, at IEN, we continue to make progress in the midst of those trying to push back. I can highlight one institution that can serve as an example in California, where voters passed a ballot initiative and proposition in 1996 that banned public universities from considering race and gender in admissions. San Francisco State University and their foundation dealt with that California stipulation and still set a target and worked with lawyers on an approach and wording, on intent and aim for a policy not to be in violation. Obviously, whatever policies institutions choose to implement, they're going to be closely scrutinized. And so, San Francisco State's foundation's investments have been used as a tool to advance racial equity by allocating to BIPOC and underrepresented managers. And at the heart of that investment strategy is the value and belief and ambition to allocate capital to managers whose strategies advance the foundation's equity agenda while generating both financial and social returns. And it definitely relates back to that financial performance piece. And, the result of implicit bias has led to the funding allocation that we've seen, despite research findings that make it evident that diverse management teams create better results. So, really, just institutions that are leading are using investment knowledge and not being distracted by misguided political messaging.
So, turning a little bit to the role of HBCUs in this conversation. Impact Alpha recently hosted a call with Cheryl Dorsey of The Plug on innovation and investment in historically Black colleges. So, how are HBCUs particularly affected and or responding to this news?
Absolutely. Thinking about the Supreme Court ruling, it's clear to see how the message can be interpreted by a lot of students of color as a message that they don't belong at predominantly white and selective institutions. Um, when I sit back and reflect on the amount of microaggressions and bias I have experienced and I have seen students experience at higher ed institutions across the country in my career, even in a world with affirmative action that wasn't really effective anyway. Um, I just don't want to even imagine what, Black and brown students may experience now when they go from being, you know, one of a few or two or three to possibly one of one students of color in a classroom. Um, so as we see admissions officers at predominantly white institutions and selective institutions admitting less Black and brown students, not because those students aren't qualified, but because race can't be used as a factor to account for, all of the historic and present systemic barriers that Black and brown students face. I think it's offensive, and I think many other students as well, because I don't want to live in a so-called post-racial world. I want to live in a post-racist world. And so, like me, black and brown students have had so many examples of not being wanted by PWIs. So students could apply to HBCUs in larger numbers, particularly well-known and selective institutions such as Howard University, where Intentional Endowments Network's board chair Diane Dillon Ridgely is a graduate, and others like Spelman and Morehouse, because these students tend to view HBCUs as safe spaces and places where their skin color and race is not an issue, especially at this time when Black students feel less welcome at predominantly white campuses. So I just want to also note that HBCUs admit all students. They're historically Black, not exclusively Black, and it's been that way for decades. And HBCUs also notably have been bucking the overall declining trend in enrollment seen in higher ed, as HBCUs have been seeing and experiencing enrollment booms prior to the Supreme Court decision. And that's really put a strain on some campuses. And at IEN, in our ongoing discussions with HBCUs, the general sentiment is that uh, the enrollment will increase, and there will be challenges with that increased demand. Many HBCUs aren't prepared for demand from that significant jump in enrollment anticipated in the next few years. Many HBCUs have dorms that are at full capacity, and faculty would need to be increased significantly to accommodate the additional students and maintain course quality. In addition, we're seeing even things like campuses that, need HVAC systems upgraded as heat increases in certain locations and geographies, and IT infrastructure that have to be ready for more students. So HBCUs are faced with many more who deserve and want to be there, but more than what they can serve today.
So, Paris, you laid out a number of the challenges facing HBCUs, but are there things that others can do to take action and support them?
Absolutely. And when I think about historically Black colleges and universities, I think about the pivotal role they play in education and equality and have played for almost 2 centuries. Um, these institutions are systematically underfunded and continue to face large gaps in state and federal funding, private donations and endowments relative to their predominantly white peers. Um, it's important to note historically, Black colleges are critical for equality and they just need more funding. So, along with the senior leadership team here at Intentional Endowments Network and in partnership with organizations like the United Negro College Fund, IEN is working to increase capacity for HBCUs to address sustainability and to help develop strategies for HBCUs to effectively accomplish their goals through peer learning and educational and networking opportunities, workshops, webinars, other conveners. And it just underscores the importance of investing in HBCUs and centering on their unique position to help reduce racial and education and economic inequities, which will improve Black communities and by extension the entire country. We've seen with HBCUs, philanthropists like Mackenzie Scott turn their attention to HBCUs in the wake of George Floyd's murder. But it's going to take a lot more than philanthropy dollars to grow HBCUs sustainably and also their surrounding community. It's also going to take community development, such as CDFIs that were created by the federal government as a way to combat systemic anti-Black racism in banking. And so, if we only look at this through philanthropic efforts, we're going to fall short. We need to raise money for endowments, especially through community development. And businesses can help bridge this gap by developing strategic partnerships with HBCUs. Because investing in HBCUs is an investment in dismantling systemic barriers.
Well, I for one am here for all of those suggestions, and I do hope people take you up on them. So, if we can turn a little bit to the legal challenge that is being faced by some folks in the venture capital domain, um, there was a lawsuit recently filed against the Black women-led venture capital fund, Fearless Fund, sort of on the heels of the Supreme Court dismantling of affirmative action. So, can you tell us a little bit about your take and on what that means? What's the signal effect there? Never mind the merits of the case, and how are investors and fund managers who have diverse strategies, diverse manager strategies, or racial equity strategies reacting?
Well, like HBCUs, women of color founders are underfunded and undersupported. This lawsuit against the Fearless Fund Foundation, very misguided. I'm actually looking forward to the lawsuit because it underscores the 99% of VC firms that have not and do not do business with Black people. And so this uh, lawsuit really attempts to ignore the problems and tries to deflect the problem, and I don't think it's really something that enlightened people will allow to happen in terms of the reaction. Um, of course, it's important to note that the latest attack against the Fearless Fund Foundation was launched by the affirmative action Supreme Court target, and they're targeting women and people of color founders, that same backer. And frankly, they should be ashamed of getting behind such an effort when women of color founders already get a minuscule percentage of venture capital funding. And as a DEI professional, I just want to also address the messaging here. And messaging is about so called anti white racism, which isn't real. Anti-white racism isn't real. There's been so many studies on racial bias, and not a single one found a reliable anti-white bias. Um, Even more, we see how the rate of discrimination is very similar and tracks the rate of discrimination decades ago, 50 years ago. It's well documented that Black Americans have worse outcomes when we look at factors and areas in income and other areas of economics. Um, this idea of anti-white racism isn't real; it's more myth than reality. So But there is a reason why folks who are backing this lawsuit are now saying discrimination against them is on the rise. And maybe they feel they're being blamed for systems they had nothing to do with creating, or maybe they feel that they're falsely accused for something that they're not responsible for, or maybe they feel overlooked or ignored. But the problem is that folks tend to believe racial equity is a zero sum game. Anti Black bias is very prevalent, which is uh, indicated in all of the research. And gains for people of color does not mean losses for white people. So, uh, in this context of this lawsuit, the accusations of anti-white racism make sense rhetorically and politically. Um, because it allows us to simultaneously enunciate anti racism and uphold racial hierarchies. It allows uh, the powerful to maintain the status quo in a system of white dominance, uh, which we can see even in our legislators across the country, and even in our Supreme Court, and how the current composition of the Supreme Court has been formed. Um, so this lack of capital is just a critical issue for Black-owned businesses. But I really think the sentiment is that this is a speed bump, and it's going to cause people to pause temporarily and realize that it's a cover up, and that they aren't that this industry isn't inclusive in the allocations that have been made. And when we fix that problem, there will be no need for a Fearless Fund. And I want to highlight that the Fearless Fund has identified key ways that we all can play a role in putting an end to this systemic injustice that we are all aware of. You can sign a petition with the Fearless Fund and donate and attend their upcoming uh, entrepreneurship and venture capital conference in Atlanta. You can visit www.fearlessfreedomnow.org and join the movement by adding your name to this fight. This is a critical moment. And at Intentional Endowments Network, we are committed to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the sustainable investing industry. So please join us.
What should impact investors specifically be thinking about right now in this moment?
I would say that impact investing at its foundation is about aligning values and beliefs with social, environmental impact along with financial returns. And so for impact investors, we have to understand the reality of the environment in which we're operating, and continue to move forward and not be um, uh, misguided with misinformation and attempts to distract. We must continue to allocate to more underrepresented and excluded, historically excluded managers, and support more Black and women owned businesses and support those communities as well.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you, Paris. I think that comes to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining and making time for this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
And that's going to do it for this week's Impact Briefing. Thanks to Paris and our producer, Isaac Silk. Sign up for Impact Alpha Open, our free weekly newsletter, directly at impactalpha.com. Or become a subscriber to get full access to our award-winning daily coverage in impact investing and sustainable finance. Just go to impactalpha.com/subscribe. Thank you for listening. I'm Monique Aiken, Managing Director for TIP, the Investment Integration Project. Be sure to check back for next week's briefing. And until then, take care.